Hello everyone, I'm Matthew Taylor, I'm the RSA's Chief Executive. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Before we begin, could I ask you to make sure your mobile phone is switched to silent? We're filming tonight's event and live streaming over the web, so welcome to everyone watching online. The hashtag for tonight's event is RSA Charity, if you'd like to get involved in the discussion on Twitter. Now, housekeeping notice is over. I'm pleased to introduce this evening's distinguished speaker, Baroness Stowell. Tina joined the Charity Commission as chair in February 2018. She joined the House of Lords as a backbencher in January 2011, was promoted to the government front bench in September the same year. She was leader of the House of Lords and Lord Privy Seal until July 2016 before joining the House of Lords. So Tina's career before she joined the Charity Commission in February this year was spanned 25 years in government, politics and the media. Nevertheless, she tells me she won't be dancing to the podium. But she did say, and this is totally unfair that you said this to me, she did say she's a better dancer than the Prime Minister, but we will not get the proof this evening, folks, as I have to tell you. So we're delighted to welcome Tina this evening. We look forward to hearing her ambitions for the Charity Commission and indeed for the sector as a whole. Tina will set out a new strategic direction for the regulator, which aims to ensure that charities are true to their purpose, maximise their benefit to society and inspire public trust. As the Chief Executive of a charity myself, I'm looking forward to hearing Tina's vision. I'll be joining Tina later on stage to lead the conversation in response to her speech, and then we'll be looking forward to hearing your questions and comments too. So for now, please join me in welcoming Tina Stowell.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very grateful to Matthew and all of his team here at the RSA for hosting us this evening. As Matthew has explained, I'd like this evening to set out my ambitions for the Charity Commission and for the charities we regulate in the years ahead. But before I do, I'd like to tell a story. It's a familiar story, but one that goes to the heart of the issue we are discussing tonight. Over a year ago, in the early hours of the 14th of June 2017, a devastating fire took hold of a residential housing block in West London. The consequences of the Grenfell Tower disaster have been utterly horrifying. They are not for me to relate. It is for the victims and survivors to do so themselves on their terms. Nor do I want to go into the official response to the disaster or indeed the work of the many registered charities that stepped in to coordinate relief efforts. I'd like instead to look at the response of ordinary people, private citizens, in the hours and days after that terrifying event. What we saw was hundreds of people from within North Kensington and far beyond moved to help those in need. People brought food and water, they brought clothes, blankets, nappies for babies, toys for children. They came to give their time, offer a hand, their ear, and whatever expertise they had to offer. And thousands of people donated over £28 million. They gave to registered charities, to informal appeals, via online fundraising platforms, in whatever way was available to them. That is charity in its purest form. It's the impulse that compels us to take action that benefits others. Our neighbours, our community, our nation, people and causes in places and countries far removed from our own experience. Charity involves generosity, of course, but it is more than that. It's the fundamental human instinct to offer help where we see problems, improve on what is already good, and to leave the world better than we found it. All charity is at heart about altruism and selflessness, about respect and care for people and causes other than ourselves. That is why we feel moved when we see or hear stories about people who genuinely put themselves out for the sake of others. Why seeing genuine acts of charity from others can motivate us to get involved too. And why, when charity reaches its full potential, its benefits stretch far beyond the immediate recipients or beneficiaries. It has far wider consequences. It makes for better communities, a better society, a better world. This is not a new insight. For generations, we have had laws and regulations to promote charitable behaviour and maximise its potential for good. But I argue that the benefits of charitable endeavour are more important now than they have ever been. We live in a country marked by divisions and disruption, social, political, economic, and by deep uncertainties. We are watching high street stalwarts decline and in some cases crumble. Our politics is more divisive and our public discourse shriller than in living memory. And as citizens, we increasingly live in echo chambers of our own assumptions. Many communicate more with like-minded strangers online than with the real complex people that surround them in their communities. These divides and uncertainties are creating profound challenges to our way of life. Charitable behaviour has a unique potential to bridge divides and help us confront uncertainty with purpose and hope. Acts of charity bring people together in place and in shared aims, attitudes and achievements. And they prove that we all gain a lot when we give a little, according to our means and our abilities. Our society needs charitable behaviour to flourish. But we know that at the moment, charities collectively are not fulfilling their potential. The clearest evidence we have for this is that the public no longer give charities as organisations the benefit of the doubt. In fact, people now trust charities no more than they trust the average man or woman on the street. Research published by the Commission in July tells us this. It also provides insight as to why this is the case. It's at least partly because the public has seen questionable behaviour by some charities and has concluded, you are not who you appear to be. You say one thing, but you do another. People have seen some charities displaying uncharitable behaviour, whether that be aggressive fundraising practices, exploitation of vulnerable people, a single-minded pursuit of organisational growth, and they have become less inclined to trust them unquestioningly. They feel that the promise of charity has not always been kept, that charities are not always motivated by the same sense of decency, concern and selflessness which drives them when they donate their hard-earned money, when they volunteer, when they take their possessions to a charity shop rather than selling them online, when they practice their altruism through countless acts of kindness and consideration. We must recognise that charities do not have a natural, eternal monopoly over the channeling of our altruistic impulses. People can find other ways to do good that do not depend on registered charities. Technology and social change have provided the means. Crowdfunding platforms that help us provide informal appeals, apps that enable peer-to-peer support for people who share a problem, social enterprises that have a social purpose while also creating wealth. Indeed, many traditional for-profit businesses now aim to make a positive impact rather than simply pursuing growth and shareholder value for their own sakes. And there will be ever more new kids on the philanthropic block as technology and human ingenuity progress. I welcome these developments, as I'm sure we all do, but they raise questions about what makes the registered charity with the tax breaks and the legal benefits associated with it distinctive and special. My conviction is that being a registered charity will need to amount to more than it does today if that status is to survive, let alone to thrive. I truly believe that unless all of us involved in charity, and that means all charities, and the Commission as regulator, take steps now to promote what is special about charity and to meet legitimate public expectations of charity, then we risk being complicit in its decline. All of us must recognise our collective responsibility as custodians of what it means to be a charity in the eyes of the public. We must all fulfil our responsibility for making the changes needed. This is my personal conviction, and it will inform every aspect of my leadership of the Commission, but it is based on more than belief. We have firm evidence of near universal accord among the public on this basic expectation that a charity, to inspire trust, must be more than an organisation with laudable aims. It must be a living example of charitable purpose, charitable attitudes, and charitable behaviour. It must behave like a charity, not just call itself a charity because of the aims it has and the work it does. Charitable aims cannot justify uncharitable means. Our evidence shows that many people from all walks of life, across all backgrounds, ages and inclinations, feel this way. They may arrive at this point for different reasons, whether because they are aware of the vulnerability of many charity beneficiaries and of the potential for charities or those working in charities to abuse that power, or because they think charities need to be more closely rooted in the values of the people who are being asked to support them. But they all end up in the same place. Our evidence shows that people want to see charities being held and holding themselves to the highest standard of charitable behaviour. So what does this mean? What does charitable behaviour imply? Just ask your neighbour, ask your family, ask the person you sit next to on the bus or train. This is not complicated. It's simple, and it goes back to the basic charitable instinct I spoke about earlier. Treat the most vulnerable with the utmost care and kindness. Relate to all people, including your colleagues, with respect. Run your affairs with integrity and care. Be prudent with your resources. Avoid extravagance, complacency, and the appearance of self-interest. Be open, transparent, and above all, be driven by the charitable purpose that got you on the register in the first place. And this implies a relentless focus on the welfare of your beneficiaries rather than the interests of your organisation. Now, I'm not advocating a new rule book for charities based on these principles. I don't think words on paper and tick box compliance with those rules would serve anyone. What I propose is that the Commission works with charities to help achieve a culture change where whatever else your organisation may be, the people involved never forget that it is a charity. And that means showing how charity is pulsing through everyone's veins in the decisions they make and the things that they do. Let me give you an example. I recently met the leader of a household named Charity. They told me that under their leadership, the charity will not compete to deliver a contract if that service is already being provided well by another local charity. Why? Because that leader understands that the charity's purpose is to help their beneficiaries, not to grow bigger and stronger for the sake of it, or worse, at the expense of another smaller charity. Because they are aware that as a leader of a charitable organisation, they have a wider responsibility towards the flourishing of charity as a whole, so more people benefit, to making society a bit better, a bit kinder. That's charitable behaviour. That's behaviour that separates a charity from a profit-making business. That's the attitude, the ethos that the public expect. I mentioned earlier that protecting what is special in charity is a collective responsibility, and this is crucial. Change is needed not just from the few charities in which something has badly gone wrong. I call on all charities to consider the impact their behaviour has on the meaning of charity in the eyes of the public. Ask yourselves, is what we are doing, and does the way we are doing it make us proud and chime with what our beneficiaries and the public associate with charitable behaviour? Many of those who are involved with charities do this already, and they do it instinctively. They hold themselves accountable against the highest standards of conduct and behaviour because they are a charity. And I've given you an example of that, of a charity which does that. To all of you, I say, do not be reticent about this. Talk about the high standards you set for yourselves, why that makes you better equipped to fulfil your purpose, better at making a difference. By speaking up, that is how you can fulfil your share of responsibility for charity more widely. And be conscious and proud that you are more than a role model for other charities. You are helping to uphold the meaning of charity for the public who feel they've been let down. I know there are some in the sector whose response might be to poo-poo the idea of charitable behaviour, who might reject the notion as motherhood and apple pie, as the perspective of a naive public that simply doesn't understand how complex an operation and modern charity is, or how clever and sophisticated you need to be to run one. Of you, I ask, if you do not buy into the basic principle that a charity should hold itself to high standards of charitable behaviour and attitudes, then why are you involved at all? And if the nature of your charity's work is complex, all the more reason to reassure the public and your beneficiaries that you're getting the basics right. Because if you can't be trusted on the basics, how can you be trusted to deliver sensitive programmes and oversee complicated structures? This is what I mean when I say charity leaders carry collective responsibility, not just for their own organisations, but for the very idea of charity itself. If you are involved in a charity today, you form part of the ship that holds within it the very concept of charity. And if you fail the public, you're chipping away at the hull of that ship, and you risk sinking more than just yourself and your own organisation. Thinking beyond legal structures and activities, that's a maxim. That maxim applies to the Charity Commission as much as it does to the charities we regulate. The Commission, too, will need to offer more and amount to more in the years ahead if we are to help maximise the benefit of charity, and if we are to meet our responsibility, fulfil our duty toward the idea, the concept of charity. The Commission has improved enormously in recent years. We have become a more effective, robust and proactive regulator, and we have begun making much better use of digital technology. This is in large part thanks to the work of my predecessor, William Shawcross, and his board and senior team, and of course the Commission's expert staff. We are, as a result, in a position of relative strength. But we must now steer a new course if we are to do our duty by the public we serve. The Commission cannot afford, literally or metaphorically, to see the fulfilment of our statutory functions as the totality of our mission. We must be able to demonstrate what we stand for in ways that chime with people's lives, concerns and interests. And to achieve this, what we stand for must be greater than simply the sum of what we do. We must be an organisation led by purpose. So we have set ourselves an ambition, which is at the heart of the strategy we are launching today and which will drive everything we do. Under my leadership, the Commission will work to ensure charity can thrive and inspire trust so that people can improve lives and strengthen society. The statement of strategic intent that we are publishing today paints a clear picture of what we need to achieve and why it matters that we do. Our ambition for the charity sector is greater than our current capacity, but before any debate about resources, it is right that I set out what role the Commission intends to play in maximising the benefit to the public that we and the sector have the potential to create. Work is now underway to develop the map that will get us there. That roadmap will translate our strategy into a plan for the next 5 years, and the details are yet to be worked through, and I don't want to preempt that work. But I do want to give some examples of the ways in which we will change, a sense of what I expect we'll be doing differently in light of our new direction. First, I've spoken about the basic public expectation that a charity must behave like one. From now on, the Commission will do more to hold charities to account against that expectation. Today, much of our focus is on compliance with the law, and it is right that we can only use our regulatory powers of protection and sanction within the legal framework. But when we limit ourselves to this, it can sometimes feel to the public like we are missing the point, or worse, like we are letting them down. We, the Commission, we also have a leadership role and a powerful voice, and I'm clear that we have a responsibility to use these. So in future, we will speak out more strongly to encourage the behaviour that people expect, to remind charities that charity is not just about what they aim to achieve, it's also about the behaviour they display along the way. We must, of course, continue to deal with wrongdoing and harm in individual charities. We've made significant improvements in this area in recent years, but here too, there's room for us to become more purposeful, more efficient. For example, in future, I want us to make better use of technology to become more fleet of foot in concluding straightforward enforcement cases. And I want to ensure that no complaint about a charity is ignored, so that those that don't result in regulatory action do inform our trend data and in turn help us become more proactive in preventing problems in charities in the first place. I also want to provide a better service to trustees who are trying to run their charity well, to provide advice, facilitate collaborations and mergers, provide swift and user-friendly permissions where these are required, to back the people who demonstrate what it means to be a charity. And crucially, the Commission must do more to help the public exercise meaningful choice around charity. As many of you know, we hold and display significant volumes of information about individual charities, and we provide data about the sector as a whole. But I'm not convinced that the way we gather, hold, and report information about charities is as purposeful and useful as it should be. Working with others, I want us to become less of a warehouse for charity data and more of a curator of knowledge about individual charities and about the sector. If we do that well, we are handing the public power and in turn giving them some confidence in charity more widely. I've mentioned that regulation needs to amount to more than the exercise of statutory functions as prescribed in law. And that must mean that our perspective is broadened. I want us to look at the wider environment in which charity operates and at the factors that influence the behaviour of charities. I have no doubt that on occasion that may mean us speaking truth to power. My aim this evening has been to tell of the Commission's purpose and focus under my leadership. I do encourage you to read our statement of strategic intent in full. I hope you will see that it describes a Commission that is purposeful and whose aims are straightforward and chime with the public, with what the public expect and what charities deserve from the regulator. Straightforward does not mean easy. For the Commission, fulfilling our purpose may involve making judgments that risk challenge, political and indeed legal. But we will not be put off from doing what's right just because it's difficult. And I am clear that we can only achieve our purpose if we have the right relationship with the charities we regulate. I see no benefit in a deliberately adversarial approach. I will not measure my success in the number of public fights I pick. I will not feel stronger for having criticised charities. And I fully expect that in pursuing our purpose, my team and I will be championing charitable behaviour as much as we will be required to draw attention to shortcomings or failings. I want the people who are working hard to uphold what it means to be a charity in the eyes of the public to know that we are on their side. As I said in a previous speech, it is the job of the Charity Commission to represent the interests of the public to charities, not to represent the interest of charities to the public. And I hope charities come to see that promoting the public interest is to their benefit. As I have said, we cannot assume that the concept of the registered charity remains the primary vehicle through which people express their charitable instincts into the future. Charities and the Commission have a shared collective responsibility for ensuring that the concept of charity survives into future generations and to enable charities to maximise the good they do. I hope I've made clear this evening that I am not complacent about the challenge ahead or the burden of responsibility on the Commission's shoulders. We need to change. And I urge all charities of all sizes to recognise that they too must read the writing on the wall and respond. I want us to work together to ensure that charity, which is so crucial to all of us, fulfills its potential and thrives for the benefit of our society and the most vulnerable within it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tina. That was very clear, very substantive speech. A lot to get into, and I also want to open up to the room. So, my first question is: it seems to me that you're doing something quite unusual here, which is that you, as a regulator, are expressing your mission in quite cultural terms. You want to influence the culture of the sector, and often regulators will say, well, look, culture isn't really our business. Our business is rules and regulations. Culture is kind of other people's business. How does a regulator influence culture? You talked about that a bit, but that's quite a big, bold move to say that you want to influence the behaviours and attitudes, not just the adherents.
But I think that part of that is making clear that, you know, what charity means. It's what I was saying in the speech. We have to recognise that charity isn't structural. It is about what people do. It is about behaviours. It is about an attitude of mind. And I do see it as our responsibility to continue to remind the sector of that, because that is part of the benefit that charity brings for people. I mean, the reason why, you know, I've set out very clearly what our purpose is, and it is to ensure charity can thrive, you know, that it is able to actually be successful in a way that inspires public trust, because the result of that is that people can then improve lives and strengthen society. When both of these things happen at the same time, the result is incredibly powerful, and it is what people want from us as a sector.
So what does that mean for your relationship with the peak organisations that represent charities, NCVO, ACEVO, ACF, all these other organisations? That I guess they would say, well, we thought we were in the business of kind of leadership and culture in the sector, whilst the Charity Commission was in the business of enforcement of rules. Are you going to be stepping on their toes? Do you think they haven't been performing their roles sufficiently?
I think we have clear and distinctive roles between the regulator, the umbrella bodies, and the charities themselves. I mean, you know, I'm very clear that the Charity Commission represents the public interest. And what I'm saying is that the public interest in charity is what I have set out. And it is therefore our responsibility to promote that interest so that charities themselves can respond and be stronger and deliver more.
So let's turn to, I mean, I think that's, you know, that's very clear, and it does, as you say, well, as you imply, it does distinguish between you and peak organisations who are, in the end, there as, in a sense, a kind of trade union for charities, and your role, as you said, is to represent the public. Let's take two or three of the kind of issues that charities might need to address more fully if they're to rise to the challenge that you've set. So the first is, do you think that charities need to be more open and explicit about the dilemmas they face? So you've talked about aggressive fundraising. what charities will say in private is that they kind of recognise that an awful lot of money that is spent on fundraising achieves nothing in terms of making the pie any bigger, but yet they've got to do their bit because they've got to keep their slice. But that's not really a dilemma they'd be willing to kind of talk about publicly, because it doesn't sound quite appropriate. You talked about size, you know. I guess a lot of charity leaders would say, well, look, I know I shouldn't really be motivated by the size of my charity, but in the end, that's the best measure of my success. That's what my board expect from me. Some charities might say, and Oxfam did a lot of work on this a few years ago, actually, the best way of appealing to the public to raise money isn't actually to tell them the truth about things, it's to present a rather simplified picture of why it is, for example, we have poverty. Do you think the charities need to be more willing to open up the kinds of dilemmas they face?
Well, if they carry, I mean, what I'm saying is, if we carry on as we are and don't recognise that the way we are currently conducting ourselves collectively as a sector is, you know, is not working in as much as, we've got growing number of charities, we've got growing demands on the charities, they're becoming more complex in the way that they are required to operate or are operating, but the public's perception of charities is heading in a different direction. I don't think we can be complacent and say, well, we have to do it this way and this is the only way we can do it and we'll just keep on going. I think what I'm saying is that, that current situation is it risks us failing ultimately. So we do have to think differently. We do have to recognise that people are looking for honesty and clarity from us. What they really want, what it boils down to in the end, is that they want continuous demonstration that the charities themselves see their reason for being more than just being there for their own sake, and that everything that they're doing is in pursuit of delivering on those charitable purposes. And I think that if they do face dilemmas in order to deliver on their purpose, then I think they have to be more open about those dilemmas that they face, recognising that it might affect the size that they are or whatever, but that's not what should be driving them. It should be their charitable purpose.
One of the things I found when I just did a series of Radio 4 on which was called The Charity Business, was a pretty inconsistent level in terms of reporting. Now, I completely understand that if you're a minor charity, and of course most charities don't employ anybody at all, then onerous reporting is not reasonable. But even larger charities, not consistently reporting, what proportion of their money they spend on fundraising or the effectiveness of their fundraising, or having, impact measurements which you could really understand. Now, as I say, that's different for different organisations. For the organisation like the RSA, it's quite difficult to know when you're a kind of think tank, thought leadership organisation, how you would measure impact, although we do our best. Do you think that more consistent and clearer reporting is one of the ways in which the charity sector could start to address that public concern?
Well, I don't want to, what I don't want to do is to sit here and start sort of proposing that we need to have a new framework for measuring impact. I've been clear that in our statement that we've released today, it's very outline and high level in terms of the things that we need to do differently. What I think that charities need to think about themselves, and it relates back to the point you were saying before, really, is that they have to sort of understand that the desire for transparency, which we hear about and we know that people are sort of calling for, that's a proxy for other things. People are really looking for, as I say, evidence that we are who we say we are, that charities are who they really are, what they claim to be. And to think about transparency or reporting, if you want to call it that, is an expression of confidence. And if you are clear as an organisation, whether you're a charity or anything else, why you exist, what you're trying to achieve, and you want to set out clearly for people, you want to be able to demonstrate the dilemmas and the different challenges and decisions that you have to take in order to in order to fulfill your purpose and deliver on the outcomes you're seeking to do, including when things go wrong, I think people will sort of feel that, yes, that's an organisation that we can see. We can see that it is very authentic and sincere and genuine in what it's all about. That's, you know, and you know, charities are very different. There's a vast array of them on the register. It would be wrong to require the same kind of, you know, precise level of reporting in the way that you might be talking about. I mean, it just would be hard to prescribe that. But I don't think it's hard to make the point that we need to be continually demonstrating that we are trying very hard to deliver on the reasons why we exist.
So just two final questions from me, and then we'll open it up. Governance of charities. I think one of the reasons why these kind of new forms, you know, crowdfunding, social enterprises, one of the reasons that maybe more entrepreneurial younger people want these models is that it often feels as though the charity model does weigh you down with quite a lot of governance, and quite a lot of charities do seem to have quite heavyweight governance. Do you think that the reform of governance is part of this story?
As far as sort of different governance requirements of the charities themselves?
That quite a lot of charities have, you know, they've got boards. There's a question about whether the boards are necessarily up to the kind of leadership role that they might play, or they've got even more kind of cumbersome structures as well. I mean, for the charity, it's up to the governance to be holding the staff. It's up to the board to be holding. So sure. If a charity isn't doing what it should be doing, there should be an internal accountability lock on that. It should be that the board is holding the staff to account. So it's one of the things, if there's a kind of cultural problem in the charity sector, some of that must be, presumably, might lie in that governance and whether or not the governance is working adequately.
Well, we hold trustees to account. They are the people who we hold to account. As you've heard me say today, we recognise that for the sector to maximise its potential, we need to do more than we are doing now to support the trustees to play their part and do their jobs. I wouldn't want to sort of say, oh, we need to have a wholesale sort of change of governance, but you know, what I do think very clearly is that what I'm all asking trustees to do is to recognise that this is something that, you know, they too need to remember that they are trustees of a charity. They are not non-executive directors of a business, and therefore the expectations they must place on the people running the charity should be in line with that. They need to, if they in their role as trustees of the charity approach the responsibility as if that organisation is just the same as a business, then that's wrong. That's not what they should be doing.
Great. I have a particular obsession about a particular aspect of governance, and if there's time I might raise it with you at the very end, which is cheating, really. I'm cheating in my role as chair, but we'll see if we have time for that. Just final question for me. I think one of the reasons that people would have welcomed your appointment is that you really understand government. So when you're facing towards government rather than facing towards the public, you kind of know how it is that you influence what goes on in Whitehall. Some of the responsibility for whether charities thrive must lie with government. And to give you an example of that, recently in the civil society strategy, there was a kind of recognition that possibly moving more from contracts, which tell charities what to do and often give them only the minimal amount of money to deliver that, to grant funding, which gives charities slightly more scope to choose how they're going to do it. That there was a recognition in the civil society strategy that possibly we should have more funding through grants and less through contracts. Tell me about how you see your role in terms of influencing the way government policies shape how charities behave.
Well, my focus is on charitable behaviour. I mean, I think that has to be our starting point. And so if there are policies which are leading charities to behave in a way which are uncharitable, then I would consider that something that we need to raise, that we need to sort of ensure that Whitehall understands the impact of policies on charitable behaviour.
Because certainly that issue of size that you talked about is not unrelated to the kind of contract culture of charities, you know, chasing contracts, and the fact that in the end as the private sector knows, it's easier to win those contracts if you've got bidding departments and the capacity to win them, which is why very often the local charities lose out. So that's an example, I think, of how policy can maybe drive the kind of outcomes you're concerned about.
But I think, my main point to everybody is that it's behaviour which is causing the issue for us at the moment as far as public expectations of charity. So whilst, yes, we need to ensure that the policy makers understand how they may be contributing to affecting charitable behaviour, we mustn't at the same time just continually look outside for others to change things for us. We need to respond to this from within as well.
Well, that's loud and clear. So let me take some points from around the room. Let's start over there. If you could say your name, that would be great.
Hello, Kate McAlpine. Could I sort of run with the line of inquiry that you were actually just ending on in the relationship between charities and government? And when we have a case now where charitable behaviour is masked under a business case, I mean, essentially large charities, the business model is pursuing government contracts and or grants. Where is the dissonance in that? I mean, it seems to me that that's profoundly dysfunctional.
Let's see if there's any other comments. We can take two or three together. Yes, there, back there.
Hi, my name's Anna Jones. I'm from a small charity based in London. I just wanted to ask if you think that the very kind of traditional view of charity and what charity means is stifling innovation within the sector at all.
Interesting. And then here.
I'm Caroline Fines, and I run an organisation called Giving Evidence. I have a question, but I also just wanted to thank you for coming and doing this in public. Like, not every regulator gets up in public and explains what they're doing on the day they do it, so thank you for doing that. My question is about impact that you talked about. A lot of what you've talked about in terms of charitable behaviour is quite sort of processy in terms of things like executive pay and safeguarding and how charities go about fundraising. And my question is the extent to which the Commission is now going to be interested in impact, that is, whether the charity actually achieves what it says it's going to achieve. So, for example, if you claim to, improve sanitation, do you actually do that? Because my understanding is that the Commission to date has been interested in whether the public trusts charities, but not so much in whether the public is right to trust charities in terms of whether they actually achieve their thing. So the extent to which the Commission, if an organisation is doing an intervention that doesn't work and is known to not work, whether the Commission is interested in that.
I think that on that last question, that was in a way one of the things I was trying to get to in this question of dilemmas. So, I remember talking to a homeless charity that said, if we suggest that street homelessness is just because people haven't got a home, people are sympathetic to that idea. If you say, well, actually, the reason people are often street homeless is because they're suffering from mental health issues or drug dependence issues or whatever, then it becomes more clouded. But that's the reality. So we're a bit stuck between what the public would like us to say to them and what the truth is. So, and what maybe where the impact lies. So again, impact, innovation, and the straitjacket of government contracts. And then we'll take some more questions.
Okay. I mean, well, I mean, in response to what you said, truth is always the right thing, right? I mean, why would you not tell the truth? And I think this is the sort of basic dilemma that we're battling with in many ways in the world right now, which is that we have over the last, people will argue, but certainly over the last 15 sort of 20 years, people have become less convinced by those in positions of authority in terms of what they say, because they don't see the evidence that supports the words, and and you see that in all sectors. What I'm saying is we're now experiencing the same kind of issue in the charity world. So, if there's any question that you're not quite sure whether to tell the truth or whether to say something else in order to hopefully maintain the support that you currently have, you are on a pathway to disaster. I mean, I just think that is the wrong approach. And if anybody thinks that is the right approach, I really, really think that they are just wrong. So you have got to find, you've got to be bold, you've got to be confident, and that's why it must come back to your purpose as an organisation. and lay out those dilemmas. You know, it might cost you some of your levels of fundraising. It might mean that you don't, you have to shrink before you get stronger. But you know, we're looking long term here. You know, this is not. I'm not talking about sort of instant remedies. You know, the situation we are facing is very serious, and you know, I'm laying out what it looks like for the charity sector, and it's very, you know, this is us now having looked, you know, it having happened in other sectors.
Because I sort of hijacked that question a bit. So just to go back to the question itself, which was, you put a lot of emphasis on trust. Is impact equally important?
Well, I think that charities, you know, what the public is asking for is, you know, do you make a difference? How are you making a difference? So if you're a charity, you know, I mean, if you're a charity that's been around for donkey's years and people sort of continue to, you know, keep supporting money, I mean, eventually, you know, they're sort of saying, well, do you actually, what exactly has happened? You know, there's a need for people to see what is happening. You know, what is the result of charities being in place? So I'm not sitting here today saying that the Charity Commission is going to come up with a new set of rules which require a certain kind of reporting. In the end, it will be for the public to decide whether they should continue to support an individual charity. One of the things that I am saying that we need to do at the Charity Commission is provide the data and the information by way of what we collect to make it easier for the public to make informed choices. But to be clear, as I'm also saying, the reason why we're wanting to do that is because we believe in charity. You know, as the regulator, we're not doing it because we want charity to be a failure. We want charity to be even more impactful and even more successful than it is today. As to the question about from Anna about small charities stifling innovation, or whether I think your point was whether regulation,
whether the charitable model can sometimes stifle innovation.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I suppose in the end it comes back to you know, the privileges and benefits that there are for coming on to the register, really, and you can't rely on, or you know, we can't expect the public to continue supporting tacitly charities to attract that level of tax advantage if we don't ensure that there is, you know, proper regulatory control around those tax situations. I mean, I don't see though why that should lead to new charities feeling that they can't innovate. I'm not sure I really understand.
I mean, I think we could get into conversations around risk and investment and borrowing and those kinds of questions. But let's move on to the. I mean, the first question was a bit a repeat of mine, but I guess emphasised again this kind of question of the impact on charities and the way charities are perceived when they seem to be, a lot of them involved, basically they seem to be public service providers and cut price public service providers quite often.
And, you know, again, I think it comes back to the charities themselves being clear about why they are responding to the tender process for a contract, and feeling confident that they are approaching that in a way which is consistent with their purposes and what they are seeking to achieve. But alongside that, as I've already said, I think there is, you know, Whitehall and local government have to understand too that if they are requiring charities to compete in a way which is leading them to behave like businesses, small or large, then you know, that's something which that, you know, they need to think about. I mean, I thought in one of the programs that, you know, on your series, there was an interesting discussion you had with a local councillor about, you know, the way he was much more broad-minded in his approach to commissioning.
That was Mick in Leeds. Yeah. No, he was a brilliant example of making the commissioning process work.
Yeah.
For Leeds. Mind you, he'd been doing the job for 25 years. So
yeah,
he was
but it's also another example in that context of where, you know, power has been sort of devolved properly down to local government. You've got a local councillor who understood what his role was, and you know, and you've got people who were empowered to operate in that way, and it does come back to that wider public debate about how, how we are sort of, operating on all sorts of different levels when it comes to public services. I mean, I'm narrowing down on charity, but, I do recognise that this is part of a much bigger issue that goes beyond us. But I want us to, I want us within the sector to understand that we have to start ourselves from our own behaviours, our own charitable behaviour.
Great. I think we've got time for one more set of questions. I'm looking for a man. I just thought I'd say that because we've just had 3 women. And I've been saying it for 12 years. I've never said I'm looking for a man. But yeah, front row here.
Thank you, Matthew. Frank Bennett. Tina, picking up on you mentioned that the Commission wants to provide the public the information they want and need. And I was looking at your statement earlier today. You say that working with others, I want us, the Commission, to become less of a warehouse for charity data and more of a curator of knowledge about individual charities. So what information do you want and how will you use that to build public trust and confidence in the sector?
Thank you. And then a gentleman here.
Hi, Mike Trupp. I mean, this overlaps slightly with the previous point, but I think, austerity and the sort of breaching of the traditional social contract that people felt has kind of relegated charities from being over and above, or charitable giving being over and above what people expect to be in place in terms of support, and instead had become almost a substitute for government services in many ways, either directly or indirectly commissioned. And I think that's affecting people's attitudes towards charities. So
Okay,
I'm just throwing that out.
As a very valid comment, but as a comment rather than a question. So we can take 2 more then.
I'd quite like to respond.
Oh, well then you can, of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
My name is James Featherby. Thank you very much indeed for your speech this evening. Do you feel that maybe something slightly 1984-ish about the state wanting to take responsibility for defining for the voluntary sector what good looks like, and also something, I guess, rather sad actually about government feeling that it needs to take responsibility for preserving a human emotion that has been around for quite a long time?
Okay. And, oh, look, well, there's a younger person there. Let's take a, yeah.
I guess I'd just be interested in your views on kind of the overall...
What's your name, sorry?
Luke McCarthy. On the overall views of the sector, you presented a couple of examples of kind of good behaviour by the sector, but also gave the message that that the sector is, the public perceptions of the sector are quite negative or not as strong as they used to be. And I guess it seems to me like that it potentially some bad apples are dragging down the whole perception of the sector, and just whether you think that there's a kind of an expectation that that one or two organisations in the high-profile cases in the last 5 years or so that have had a particularly negative effect on the sector, or whether there's a fundamental problem with the charity sector per se.
Just move the microphone forward very briefly, because we're running out of time. So.
Very quick, George Kesa, fellow. A very quick question. The protection for whistleblowers in the UK is just for employees. If it were a crime to retaliate against a whistleblower, or if whistleblowers that are not employed by organizations could whistleblow also, that would help give more transparency. And most charities rely on volunteers, not on paid employees. And these are the people who are on the ground and know if something is wrong. So if we want to restore transparency, not just top-down, but bottom-up, empowering people to whistleblow when they see something wrong would really help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was all men then, but anyway, guess gone.
Okay. I mean, on whistleblowing, just to say briefly, I mean, that is something which is very much on our radar, and we're sort of looking at how we can strengthen our own sort of processes on that. So more on that to follow. I think as far as the points that Luke, James and Mike raised in their sort of different way, I mean, I suppose what I'd say is that, I mean, it would be wrong, it would definitely be wrong to have the view that the only reason why the public feels as they do at the moment about charities is because of those big scandals that we've seen exposed over the last few years. They are, you know, what I think we have to first and foremost understand is that we are living, as I've already said, we're living in an age where people generally are feeling sort of very let down by sort of institutions or people in positions of authority. And we have to understand that charities are part of that, you know, as in we too are institutions and we too have authority, whether we're small or large, because once you're on a register, you know, you attract some status. And whilst those big scandals will have fueled people's anger and will have made a lot of people feel that maybe suspicions or concerns they'd had about whether charity was really what they sort of thought it would be, or think that it should be, it would be, I think, very unwise and very complacent to just assume that that's the only thing we need to respond to. We have to understand, which is what I was trying to sort of point out in the speech, that we've got a real collective need to demonstrate to the public that what they expect and understand of charity, and it does come back to behaviour, is what, you know, we feel is important about charity too, which leads me to James's point about 1984. This is not about the government preserving human instinct. This is about charities preserving what it is that, you know, is so important and valuable in society. This is not, you know, I can't do this. This is about charities themselves. What our role is to make sure that the framework is there for charities to respond accordingly, and for me as a representative of the public interest to make sure that what the public expect is properly understood. And as for sort of austerity and charities doing work in place of public services, I don't think that's really the issue here. I think it's more that people sort of feel that in this current day and age, what they are in more need of is for charities to actually build those bridges, to actually be the vehicles that bring people together who we have seen fractured and divided in our country and many other places in the Western world. And as far as informed public trust and what information do we want, I'm sorry, Frank, I haven't got any details for you yet, but I promise more will follow in due course. But this is very much the start of our strategy. We haven't yet set out the detail, but over the next few months, but in some cases, you know, into the years that follow, it's a 5-year plan, then clearly will become more detailed and more informative as we go along.
So Tina, thank you very much. We've run out of time. I can prove that because I've not even been able to confront you with my obsessive question that I want to ask. Oh, go on, I will grab you on the way out there. So thank you all for your questions, absolutely fascinating questions. We will be watching, Tina, with enormous interest as the strategy unfolds and the work of the Charity Commission unfolds under your leadership, and we're very grateful to you for joining us tonight and sharing your vision. Tina Stowell.